Now we start from France. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has arrived at Santé prison in Paris to start a 5-year prison term. Sarkozy, who was the conservative president of France between 2007 and 2012, was sentenced for allegedly conspiring to raise campaign funds from Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Sarkozy's lawyers have already filed an appeal to release him from imprisonment, on the grounds that there is no risk of him repeating the crimes, destroying evidence, or pressuring witnesses. They also said that the former French Prime Minister will be in jail for just over a month should the appeal be accepted, and that their first priority is to get him out. Let's listen in.
Au moment où nous parlons, la demande de mise en liberté de Nicolas Sarkozy a été déposée. À partir du moment où il a mis un pied en détention, les critères qui justifient cette détention ne trouvent pas à s'appliquer. On pourrait lui reprocher, on pourrait craindre qu'il ne se présente pas, qu'il ne reste pas à la disposition de la justice. À 9h35, un peu en avance, il était devant la maison d'arrêt pour être incarcéré. Il n'y a pas de risque de renouvellement des faits, pas de risque de destruction de preuves, il n'y a pas de preuves. Pas de risque de pression sur les témoins. Rien ne justifie la première heure de détention. Il y est pour un minimum de 3 semaines ou 1 mois, puisque la Cour d'appel a 2 mois pour statuer sur une demande de mise en liberté, et le délai moyen à la Cour d'appel de Paris, c'est 1 mois. Donc, en tout état de cause, même si rien ne justifie cette détention, il y est pour 1 mois. C'est un moment, comme Jean-Michel Darrois le disait, un moment qui est très dur.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Dan Perry. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Dan, for joining us again. Good to see you. Dan, looking at this, Sarkozy, he's convicted of the connections to Muammar Gaddafi. What's it look like, and can you tell us more about this conviction?
Well, Sarkozy faces a whole slew of accusations, including influence peddling and other things, but the conviction in question has to do with his campaign almost 20 years ago, receiving significant monies, maybe over millions of euros, from the regime of Muammar Gaddafi, who was at that point trying to rehabilitate himself after his complicity in a Lockerbie bombing, and was trying to himself peddle influence in Europe. This is extremely serious, and obviously it leads to jail sentences, but there are complications because, first of all, the charge is conspiracy and not individual involvement. He theoretically knew about it. It's unclear the degree of his exact involvement. Furthermore, he and his lawyers deny absolutely any wrongdoing. Whether or not that is credible is another question. But the main concern is that the case is not yet played out in the courts. It's still under appeal. And the lower court decided to send him to jail, even though the appeal and his conviction is still pending. That is very unusual, both in France, I think, and in general. A similar case in Israel where Ehud Olmert went to prison. His sentence only began after the Supreme Court rejected his conviction. It rejected his appeal of his conviction. So Sarkozy is, among other things, requesting to be released, if nothing else, merely on those grounds that the appeal is still pending. Moreover, there's a larger issue here because, the idea of throwing former leaders in jail has many facets to it. On the one hand, it projects that no one is above the law, equality before the law, very important, that institutions are strong, that the executive, meaning the president, or the prime minister in some cases, is beholden to the public, essentially. And this is important in the era where, from the U.S. onward, you have leaders who seem to think they're above the law. And in the case of the U.S., the Supreme Court has actually granted the presidency something close to immunity forever, unlike in France, where it's during the term in office. So that's good. But on the other hand, such cases always raise the suspicion of political vendettas and of a former leader being hounded by the new ones. That, in some people's eyes, is why Lula da Silva ended up in jail in Brazil. I'm not countenancing that conspiracy theory, but some people think that. if Donald Trump were ever actually convicted or jailed in the U.S., seems fantastical, but for sure he would claim it's a witch hunt, and on and on. And this in France is particularly bad because the French political system is in great crisis, as we see in the fact that France also made news just in recent days, in recent weeks, when Le Cornu is unable to establish a government, and yet Sarkozy, rather Macron, reappoints him in what seems like an act of total defiance against Parliament. And there's a reason for this, because the country's ungovernable, because the country's basically made for two blocks. The Republicans and the Socialists were the two blocks, two parties for many, many decades, and that was the essence of the Fifth Republic established by de Gaulle, that the two blocks, one of them controlled Parliament, and the presidency maybe was controlled by the other party, usually not, and somehow this worked. But France now has three blocks, roughly one-third each in public opinion. The right, Macron, center, and the left, they loathe each other. There's no natural alliance. So you're looking at a country which seems to be ungovernable, whose political system is misaligned with its ideological landscape, now facing a former a president thrown in jail under circumstances that are a little bit bizarre because of the ongoing appeal. France is in turmoil.
Yeah, indeed. And you have partly already then answered my question, but what does this conviction of a former president reveal, a French president reveal about France's state, and how might Sarkozy's imprisonment affect public trust in political institutions and future campaign finance regulations in France?
Well, the clearly good impact is that it becomes very clear that campaign financing is very closely watched, and you know, violations of the law in this realm are very severely punished. That is something that many democracies have wrestled with, and mainly unsuccessfully, because there's so many ways to funnel money into the system indirectly. In the U.S., the political action committees have basically gotten around the attempts to keep big money out of politics, and it's failed, because big money right now is all over politics in the U.S. and they control so much of what happens and who can get elected. France is making a stand, and in that regard, it is a little bit of a piece with the European Union in general, sort of leading the world in efforts to regulate our way out of imperfections and chicaneries that are essentially part of human nature. So that bit is good. If Sarkozy were more popular, then I think this could be a little bit more toxic than it actually is in the political system. Imagine again if Trump were thrown in jail, you know, so much of the U.S. would be completely up in arms. Sarkozy became a very unpopular president for reasons to do with his performance, and as a consequence, there isn't a huge outpouring of anger about the weirdnesses in this case, which include, as I say, the fact that the appeal is ongoing, and it's somewhat inexplicable to me why they wouldn't just wait it out. Bottom line, France joins a fairly small group of countries that have thrown their leaders in jail. I mentioned one of them, Israel, and another one, Brazil. There's also a former leader, Park, in South Korea, who was also thrown in jail. But these things are extremely rare. The only other European president I can think of is Silvio Berlusconi, who had his own remarkable career because he was a billionaire who controlled the media in Italy, but he was, towards the end of his career, a bit of a clownish figure. That applies less to Sarkozy, who's more sober and somber to a degree. He is appealing to the courts. Who knows, he might eventually appeal to Macron, which would be a little bit inelegant for him, because Macron does not come from the same political background of the center-right as Sarkozy. And also, the presidency in France, I believe, has the power constitutionally to issue pardons, but it's extremely rare and sort of not a tradition as it is in the U.S. And so the story hasn't played out quite yet, but it certainly is fascinating.